This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Welcome back to How Will I Die presents Would I Survive, the show where I, Nicholas Howe, explore the possibilities of survival in horror movies, and for this episode, horror shorts. This is part 2 of a two-part series where I look at the Huluween 2019 Film Fest shorts and decide whether or not I would survive them. The rating scale for this is going to be 3 parts. There's either would survive, which means that I would be able to reasonably survive the situation. Possibility of survival, which means given certain factors, I could survive or I could not. And then finally, we have would not survive. It's exactly what it says on the tin, would not survive. For these shorter films, I'm just going to be doing basically a review description. And at the end of this episode, I will be ranking all 7 of them from my most favorite to my least favorite. Let's go ahead and get started with Ride. The basic premise of Ride is a girl who just moved to the big city ends up joining her friend's soul cycling class, which is basically just riding a bike in one spot as exercise. Now, soul cycling is actually incredibly difficult, even based on that description alone. However, when it gets even more intense is when you start to sweat more and when you start to fear for your life a little bit. And that's what happens as the ride becomes more and more intense, as this new girl is thrown into a exercise routine that all these other people have done, as quoted from the film, 699 times. The girl is forced to continue riding as everyone starts to do wildly crazy shit. Everyone dons these horrifying face masks. Some people are doing walking on their arms and legs, but backwards. Crab walking, I guess is what that's called. I don't know. And just a bunch of horrifying imagery plays over a intense workout soundtrack. It technically ends with her being surrounded by everyone as she continues to ride with her legs locked onto the bike pedals, but that's not actually the ending of the short. This film actually turns out to be a subversion of the genre because the main girl doesn't actually die. Which, sorry for including it on this, but if I was going to cover all 7, I needed to cover this one as well. So, it's very interesting that this is one of the top horror choices from this film fest, because no one dies, and it definitely subverts the genre as, this is the worst thing that happens, even though the last lines are this girl who was just forced into riding a bike for forever, basically, asking how does she join the class. Obviously, since she didn't die, that means that this is a 100% positive would survive, and I'm okay with that. Next up is the horror comedy short called The Ripper, which is about a band practice that goes kind of awry. During practice, the main vocalist asks the secondary guitar guy if he can do anything special after insulting his guitar playing skills, which is a little bit savage, but there are brief moments where the comedy comes through really well in this. The secondary guitarist is yeah, I can do something a little special, and he shows them. His special thing is that he takes his head off and transports it in a wormhole type thing directly next to the lead vocalist. This one doesn't technically count as a death because the guy is still alive and he's some sort of demon person, creature, I don't know. It's not really explained because it doesn't need to be. The first death actually happens immediately after when the guitarist blows the head up of the drummer. Because of magical means of death, this one is not survivable. I would not survive having my head exploded, as much as I would like to believe otherwise. The funniest part about the guy who gets his head blown up is that man's name is Nick as well. And that is all the deaths in The Ripper. Not a very survivable film, apparently. 1/3 of the cast of that film dies. Next up, we have Swiped to Death. This one has 2 young 20-somethings, maybe early 30-somethings, who match on a dating site similar to Tinder and plan to meet up spontaneously. Most of this film is actually shot as text-based, with two of them interchanging, sending text messages back and forth while this sound plays in the background. The text contains some heavy foreshadowing, but in the end, they agree to meet up at the girl's house. As the man leaves his house to go over to the girl's house, it's shown that he is in fact a serial killer, which he mentioned in the text messages as a joke, but we do see a dead body. Not quite sure how that person died, assumed by knife stabs, so I'm going to say possibility of survival, as that's the first death in this short film. It ends with another death as a vampire jumps out who happens to be a friend of the girl's and eats the man, and that ends the film on a death. I'm going to say would not survive, as I've stated before, because anything from behind the back, I'm not surviving it. That's the easiest way to take me out, is to get behind me. Lastly, we have the short Undo, which is about a man who is a scientist who creates time travel in a small form. After discovering that his machine works to do time travel, he gets into a small argument with a Halloween ornament of death and tells it its days are numbered, and then he starts to see a specter in the distance. The man attacks the specter with a baseball bat, but the specter ends up turning the bat into rust that crumbles away. The man then hits the specter over the head with a bottle of champagne and ends up killing it, finding out that the specter was himself stuck in a sort of time fluctuation. The first and only death of this short film is, frankly, kind of weak, but that's life, I guess. I'm going to say possibility of survival. If your body is shifting in and out of existence in time, I don't see why a bottle to the head would exactly kill you. So I'm going to say possibility of survival for this one. And that's it for all the short films from the Huluween Film Fest 2019. Let's go ahead and rank them from my least favorite to my favorite. My least favorite of these is Ride. I didn't particularly like it, and while it served as an atmospheric thriller, the extra added end kind of threw it off for me. Next is Undo. It's an okay story, but it just wasn't really what got me there as far as horror goes. Next up is Hidden Mother. I enjoyed it. It just wasn't as scary as the top few that are coming up. Next up is Dunes, or The Dunes. I really liked this one because of the prop of the hand with the eyeball in it. It was pretty cool. Then it's Flagged is up next in my top 3. I liked Flagged because it seemed like something that could actually happen in real life. Content editors are a big thing, and why shouldn't there be a ghost that specifically haunts them? My second choice is The Ripper. I like horror comedy a little bit more than typical horror, and it's done really well and it looks really good. And then lastly is Swipe to Death. Is my favorite of these 7, just because I really like the story. I really like the idea behind the story that the guy is a serial killer and he ends up dead at the end, and it's all said outright, but the audience is supposed to take it as a joke. And that's my rankings for all 7 of the films. If you watch them, go ahead and let me know on Twitter whether you agree with my listing. That's going to do it for this episode of Would I Survive? A lot of possibility of survival in this one. Let's go ahead and real quick jump into the things and stuff, which I don't have any of. It was a real quick things and stuff, I think. Thank you for listening, and tune in later this week when I have a new episode of How Will I Die Out. And remember, death is coming, so why worry about the inevitable? Focus on the possibilities.
To hell